Let's start off by taking a look at the basics of validation, and then we'll take a look at a few different options available to us through the use of check constraints that will allow us to validate the data. So the first question becomes, why validate? Why bother? Isn't this going to slow things down because now we're expecting SQL to do extra steps, extra things? And the answer to that question is, well, yeah, it is going to slow SQL down a little bit. But there's still a lot of reasons to do this. For starters, for security purposes. That one of the things that may happen is I may be displaying my data back out to the user eventually, maybe as part of a web page, and certain HTML scripts or otherwise could wind up causing damage. So one of the things that I may need to ensure is that HTML is not going to be placed into longer strings that are eventually displayed out inside of a web page. I also want to do this to help avoid corrupt data. That one of the things that can happen is people could put in maybe an invalid customer ID, an invalid type option, and now I have to go in later on and clean that up. And having personally been the one responsible for having to go back in and clean up a messy database, I'm here to tell you that it's really a pain. That as much as possible, it's going to save you a lot of heartache if you start with good data, if you don't allow that bad data in there in the first place. So a little prevention now is going to save you a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of money later on. We have several different options for doing validation. Some of the options fall under the umbrella of a constraint. And constraints come in a few different flavors. We can have a default constraint where we're going to provide a default value. We can have primary key and unique columns, so that way we can ensure there's a unique value inside of each row for that column. We can have foreign key constraints, which will point to another column somewhere else. Could be inside the same table, could be inside of a different table. We can have our own custom code where we maybe ensure that one value is less than or greater than another value. And we can also have an identity column. Now, an identity column isn't technically a constraint, but I'm going to include it in this lesson just because it sort of fits with everything else that we'll be doing. An identity column, as we're going to see, is an auto count. Now, if we need more power, maybe more complex code, then what we can do is we can create a trigger. Now, the nice part about a trigger is that we have full access to all of SQL. The downside to a trigger, however, is that it is going to perform slower than a constraint. So as a general rule of thumb, if you can do it with a constraint, do it with a constraint rather than a trigger. Now in this lesson, we're going to take a look at constraints. In a following lesson, we're going to take a look at triggers.